What is going on, guys? Bam Deathstroke back here with Esper Emergency Powers. We're going to be taking a look at the deck today. Emergency Powers, as you know, 7 mana. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards, exile Emergency Powers, and if we cast it during our main phase, we get to put a permanent card with converted mana cost 7 or less from our hand onto the battlefield. And of course, that happens after we draw 7 cards. And then, of course, with our favorite new white enchantment in play, Smothering Tithe, that will also give us 7 treasure tokens unless our opponent pays 2 mana each time they draw the card. I've found that this combo is basically game-winning if you get it to resolve. Problem is getting it to resolve with the aggressive format that we're currently playing in, as well as the very combo-centric metagame with Wilderness, Reclamation, and Nexus of Fate. So we're going to take a look at the deck. First off, we will start off with the lands. We've got 3 Drowned Catacombs, a full 4 Glacial Fortress, 3 Godless Shrines, full play set of Hallowed Fountain, 3 islands, 2 plains, 2 swamps as our basics, and then 3 Watery Graves, giving us 24 total lands and 36 spells. Starting off in the 2-drop, we're running 2 Search for Azcanta. As a little bit of card filtering. It can also help us search for our emergency powers should we get that late into the game. Though most of the time, if we've gotten that far, we've probably already lost. Moving on to the 3-drop slot. 3 absorbs to counter spells and give us a little bit of life gain against the aggro decks. As well as 3 mortify. I found that this card is just extremely well placed in the meta currently, whether you're playing Orsov or Abzan or, in this case, Esper, whatever you're playing. It deals with creatures at instant speed, and it can also deal with cards like Search for Azcanta, Wilderness Reclamation, even opposing Smothering Tithes that we run into. I think this card is very underrated at the moment, very underplayed. Definitely play these if you're running black-white. Moving on to the 4-drop slot, we've got, of course, a full playset of one of the key pieces to the deck, Smothering Tithe. 4 mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If they don't, we get a colorless treasure artifact token. That, of course, we can sacrifice to add mana to our mana pool. We also have 2 Settle the Wreckage. Exile all attacking creatures target player controls. That player searches their library for that many basic lands, puts them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffles their library. Again, we want to stay until the late game as long as possible, so we are running a ton of removal. Settle the Wreckage, just part of that. As well as needing removal, we also need card draw to churn through our deck, so we are running 3 Chemist's Insights, which basically is 6 of them, because we have the Jumpstart ability, discarding a card and casting it from our graveyard. And then another way to stay alive, Kaya's Wrath destroys all creatures, and we also gain life equal to the number of creatures we control that were destroyed this way. So, we don't actually have a lot of creatures that we could play, but if there is ever a pinch where, we, have our Azor or a Chromium in play, we just get a little bit of life. But yeah, just mainly a way to sort of slow down our opponent, keep them off the board while we churn through our deck, and hopefully find our win conditions. Also, Cleansing Nova is another board wipe. We can destroy all creatures, or we can destroy all artifacts and enchantments. Mainly we'll be destroying all creatures, but if they've got a couple Wilderness Reclamations in play, we can use Cleansing Nova to take care of those and any other pesky artifacts and enchantments. So it gives us a good versatility removal board wipe at the 5-drop slot. Also in the 5-drop slot, we've got Precognitive Perception, another addendum card. We can cast this at our opponent's end step to draw 3 cards. Or if we need to, we can cast it during our main phase and then scry 3 before we draw 3 cards. So we could see essentially 6 cards for 5 mana, which is really good during our main phase. And also drawing 3 at the end of our opponent's turn if we're not doing anything, or if we could maybe win that next turn. Digging deeper into our deck is never a bad thing. Also in the 5-drop slot, another way to win the game with this deck, Revelon Riches. Of course, everyone's favorite Ixalan enchantment. 4 and a black for whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, we get a treasure token, and at the beginning of our upkeep, if we have 10 or more treasures, we win the game. So if we've got a Revelon Riches in play and we Kaya's Wrath our opponent's board and they've got 5 creatures out, we get 5 tokens, and eventually, hopefully we get to 10 or more treasures with a combination of this, our Wraths, and our Emergency Powers Smothering Tithe combo, and that is one of the biggest ways to win this game, and actually probably the biggest way if our opponent doesn't just scoop after we get a bunch of treasures with Smothering Tithe. Moving on to the 6-drop slot, we start to get into the big permanents that we can put into play with our emergency powers. The first one being Azor the Lawbringer. 6 mana, 6/6 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent can't cast instant or sorcery spells during their next turn. So we take them off of Nexus of Fate or any other instant and sorceries, Precognitive Perception, board wipes, anything like that. And then whenever it attacks, we can pay X white, blue, blue, and for those that don't know, that is Sphinx's Revelation, which means we gain X life and draw X cards. So if we've got Azor out and we attack in for 6, we can also pay essentially minimum 3 white, blue, blue to draw 3 and gain 3. Or with our Smothering Tithe, Revelon Riches treasure tokens, we could have 6, 7, 8 as the X and gain 8 and draw 8. Another big 6-drop that we can put into play, it's not just creatures that we can put in, it's any permanent. So we can put in the Immortal Sun, 6 mana artifact. Players can't activate Planeswalker loyalty abilities. Does not matter to us, we do not have any of those in our deck. At the beginning of our draw step, we draw an additional cards. Our spells cost 1 less to cast, and the few creatures that we have get +1/+1. Key combo piece of the deck, emergency powers, of course, we went over it. 7 mana, each player shuffles hand and graveyard into their library, draws 7 cards, and we exile it. And if we cast it during our main phase, we get to put a permanent card with converted mana cost 7 or less from our hand onto the battlefield. So that includes our next card, Chromium the Mutable, 7 mana, 7/7, flash flying Elder Dragon. It cannot be countered, which does not matter if we play it with our emergency powers, but it can't be countered anyway if we just have to cast it for 7 mana. We can also discard a card, and until end of turn, Chromium becomes a human with base power and toughness 1/1, loses all abilities, and gains hexproof. So, and it also can't be blocked. So instead of being a 7/7 flash flying that can't be countered, it becomes a 1/1 hexproof, can't be blocked. So just a way to give ourselves some evasion. We really don't want this to be a 1/1, but it does have that ability to avoid removal and stuff like that. Moving on, we've got Warrant to Warden. Warrant, a very good early game play. We can put an attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library, and if we do that to a token, of course it just dies, so we've got ourselves some early game protection there. And Warden gives us a 4/4 white and blue Sphinx creature token with flying and vigilance, which goes towards Kaya's Wrath if we have to wrath the board afterwards, and also just gives us a big flying vigilance beatdown plan. And our final card in the main deck, a 2 of Syncopate, just another sort of early game play. We can play this on 2, counter their 2-drop, counter their 3-drop if they play it on turn 3, and we've got this up. Counter that spell, or counter target spell unless its controller pays X, and if it is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So I believe this does stop Nexus of Fate. Not 100%, I would assume so, because I think Nexus of Fate says if it would be put in the graveyard, shuffle it into the library instead, or something like that. So if we exile it, I think that works. Do not quote me on that. Somebody in the comments let me know if that works the way I think it does. Moving on to the sideboard, we've got a couple of different plans here. We've got our second Cleansing Nova, of course, as another board wipe. A couple of Duress against control mirrors. A couple of Essence Scatter against creature-based matchups. A couple of Negates, again, for the control mirror. A couple of Mass Manipulations. We are creating a bunch of mana with our treasure tokens. So we could gain control of, maybe we get 3 target creatures and or planeswalkers and we just swing the game completely in our favor. 2 more Kaya's Wraths for, again, just kind of aggressive matchups. We don't normally bring in a full 2 of. We usually pick between this or Cleansing Nova, depending on how we sideboard the rest of our matchup. We also have a single Unmoored Ego to get rid of any combo pieces. Choose a card name, search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards with that name and exile them. Player shuffles their library, then draws a card for each card exiled from their hand this way. So we can take out Wilderness Reclamation or Teferi or something like that. If you're in blue-black, much like Mortify, if you're in blue-white, I feel like people should be playing this card a lot more than what I've been seeing, especially given the blue-black and Grixis type control decks that are being played. I think this is a really undervalued card right now, and I like where it's situated in Standard. Finally, our last card in the sideboard, Deputy of Detention. Gives us a good early game blocker if we need it, and when it enters the battlefield, we exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls and all other non-land permanents that player controls with the same name as that permanent until Deputy of Detention leaves the battlefield. So if they've got a bunch of Merfolk, they've got a bunch of Merfolk Mistbinders or something like that, we can take care of all of those for 3 mana. We can just take care of anything that's a big threat to us, even if there's not multiple on the battlefield. So I really like Deputy of Detention coming in from the sideboard. That is going to do it for Esper Emergency Powers. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like. It helps me out a lot. If you have any suggestions for the deck, be sure to leave those in the comments down below. Also leave down there if you want to see me play this deck more often. I've really enjoyed playing it, and I want to know if you guys want to see it more often. Also, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, and after you do that, make sure you click the little bell icon to get notified whenever I upload a video, and I will see you guys next time.